to LBC and send in your question. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, NHS England's warning it could be facing the toughest winter on record as it sets out how it plans to cope. Data-driven war rooms are being set up in every local area over concerns the combined impact of flu, COVID and staff shortages will cause unprecedented pressure. Matthew Taylor, the Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation, hopes new Chancellor Jeremy Hunt sticks to previous demands he's made about staffing.
He'd made absolutely clear that something has got to be done about the workforce crisis in the NHS. He'd called for a proper costed workforce plan.
Liz Truss is facing a group of Eurosceptic Tory MPs tonight as she faces increasing calls to resign as Prime Minister. A Snap poll suggests the majority of the Tory party members want her to leave, number 10. Almost 38 hours after two climate activists climbed up the QE2 bridge in Dartford, they've been brought down by police and arrested. The protest by Just Stop Oil jammed roads around Kent, Essex and South East London. Average UK petrol prices have risen for the first time since July. Official figures show a litre of fuel cost 162.8 pence on Monday. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 17 points at 69.37. The pound buys $1.13 and €1.15. LBC weather, it will be breezy this evening with showers moving to the southwest and northern Ireland. Heavy and thundery in places. Drier elsewhere with a low of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I have the most good-looking panel we have ever had on this programme tonight. We have Rebecca Long-Bailey, Labour MP for Salford and Eccles, former Shadow Cabinet Minister and party leadership candidate. Samuel Kasumu is former Special Advisor on Race and Communities to Boris Johnson while he was Prime Minister. He's running to be the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London. Lord Brian Paddick is next to me, Liberal Democrat peer, former Mayor of London candidate. I'm sure you could give Samuel a bit of advice on that. And former Deputy Assistant Commissioner in the Metropolitan Police. And David Linden is SNP MP for Glasgow East. He's the party's work and pension spokesperson in Westminster. We may get a question on the triple lock tonight. It wouldn't surprise me at all. The number to call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. And if you have Alexa, say, Alexa, send LBC a comment and you can send in your question that way. And don't forget to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Jim in Sunderland, who's texted in his question. After all this chaos of the last few weeks, I'm outraged and stupefied that Liz Truss is still in number 10. It's a very underused word, I think, stupefied. Why does the panel think the Tories haven't got rid of her, and should they? And let's combine this with another question from Jay in St Ives. Jay, what's your question?
Yeah, good evening, panel. Is it time for the general election?
Right, so lots to talk about there. Rebecca Long-Bailey, let's come to you first.
Well, I'm outraged as well. I mean, how dare Liz Truss and her new Chancellor expect the people of the country to pay for their mistakes, a failed plan to siphon wealth up to the very top. There's no mandate for this whatsoever. I think Liz Truss has to resign and we need to have a general election as quickly as possible.
Now, when you say you need to have a general election as quickly as possible, how would that be brought about? Because there's no constitutional requirement for a general election.
Well, no, and that's the difficulty, I think, with the end of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. Previously, you would be able to initiate a general election with a majority of MPs in Parliament. That's not the case anymore. It would have to be initiated by the Prime Minister herself.
Not quite.
Or,
you could put down a vote of confidence.
Exactly, or a vote of no confidence. So I think the clock is ticking really now on Liz Truss. Now, do I think the Conservatives Conservatives will vote for a general election, given that their poll rating is so low at the moment. I don't think turkeys are going to vote for Christmas.
Nor even Tories.
But I think there's a moral duty now. The economy is going to hell in a handcart on the current trajectory that it's on. We had a Chancellor yesterday that announced what can only be described as another round of austerity after 12 years of failed austerity that stunted our economic growth, that's imposed misery on hundreds of thousands of people up and down the country, and absolutely starved public services of funding to the brink of absolute collapse. We need to have a government that has the levers of control over the economy, has a plan for growth, and that's why we need to see a Labour government as quickly as possible.
Samuel Kasumu, you've drawn the short straw this evening, I think.
Short straw this evening. Oh, gosh. Today on the way here, someone said to me, Samuel, stay on message. And I said to them, but what is the message here? I mean, listen, last week I went home and my wife said we've received a letter about our mortgage renewal and it looks like our payments are going to go up by close to 50%. And that was going to be the experience from
50%.
Close to 50%, yes. And that's going to be the experience of potentially millions of people across the country. And so, for the avoidance of doubt, mistakes were definitely made. And Jeremy Hunt is trying his best and doing what I think are the right things to try and restore some kind of credibility and confidence in the markets. And by the way, Rachel Reeves yesterday didn't seem to disagree with much of what Jeremy was saying.
Well, she didn't disagree with the reversal of the tax cuts. I don't think she agreed with his strategy overall, and certainly he'll be outlining that on the 31st of October, so we'll have comments to make on that in due course. Okay, well,
good luck with that. Now, but the point I would make is the people who I feel the least sorry for are my Conservative members of Parliament who may feel like they have buyer's remorse. I don't think the right thing to do right now is...
Well, and Conservative members. The people who you want to vote for you in London.
Totally, but members of Parliament certainly were responsible for Liz Truss being in the final two. And what I think they should be doing right now is coalescing around Liz Truss. And actually, I agree with Nadine Dorries. I don't think it would make any sense for us to replace our Prime Minister after less than 2 months.
Poll ratings today are less than Prince Andrew's. I mean, that's how bad it's got. I mean, when it gets that bad, there's no way back from that. So surely the best thing to do is suffer the political difficulty of having a new leader again, but at least you get it out the way, because at some point it's going to happen in the next few weeks or months.
Ultimately, those members of Parliament were responsible for Liz Truss being in the final two. Some will say, well, I didn't vote for her, but your candidate, if they went on the final two, didn't get it onto the final two. In terms of Rishi, unfortunately for him, the members didn't choose him. So again, it was an element of choice that we made, and I think we have to make sure we try and give it a chance to work. And hopefully, October the 31st will be another step in the right direction. Definitely the short straw.
Valiantly fought. David Linden.
Jim asked why Liz Truss is still in office. I think, frankly, it's because the Conservative Party can't decide who should take on that mantle at the moment. A poison chalice, I might think. In regards to Jay's second question, yes, I think there should be a general election. The fact that we have, a Prime Minister and our Chancellor who, I'm afraid, are just not running the economy properly. I mean, I think people seem to think that somehow Jeremy Hunt has come in as the saviour. I mean, Jeremy Hunt's the same guy who presided over the decline of the National Health Service in England. I think that perhaps he's been away for a while and people have forgotten that. But what we saw in Rebecca's...
I'm sure you'll remind them.
Yes.
Well, also, what do you mean by that? I mean, spending went up under Jeremy Corbyn's... Jeremy Hunt.
I wish it had.
Spending would have gone up under Jeremy Corbyn. Probably a bit too much.
Jeremy, you guys said Jeremy Corbyn had a magic money tree, and we saw plenty of that when we were looking out, promising tax cuts for people in £150,000 a year more. I'm quite content with there being a general election. We in Scotland, I think we've won every election since 2007, and we'll continue to fight in our record.
Are you not concerned though by the rise of Labour? 56% in the latest poll, 36% lead over the Conservatives, and that would mean Labour seats in Scotland. They only have one at the moment, but that would mean that you would be on the decline in Scotland.
But I would put the question back to you: is in Scotland, what would Labour's message be? The general election would be fought on the issue of the Constitution, and traditionally Labour have danced in the middle of the road on the issue of the Constitution, and generally what happens is when people dance in the middle of the road, they get splatted. So I guess the question would be, what would Labour campaign on in the general election in Scotland?
I'm not a spokesman for Scottish Labour, so I don't need to.
I think they've only got
that.
one in Westminster, sadly. But yeah, I'm not worried at all about the Labour Party's right.
As somebody who's a Liberal Democrat and used to being in the middle of the road, Brian Paddick, what's your answer to the questions from Jay and from Jim?
Well, the trouble is, people are outraged. As Rebecca has said, that Liz Truss is still Prime Minister. You know, her personal rating, as you say, is minus 70. I mean, I can't remember any Prime Minister ever having a rating.
I don't think even Nick Clegg got to that, did he?
Well, he wasn't Prime Minister, to be fair. And public opinion also.
SNP spokesman prefers David Cameron to Nick Clegg.
No, he probably wouldn't be the person I would have in my coalition of chaos. We're very much working with Keir Starmer on that.
Brian.
And the other thing the public opinion polls show is that the general public want a general election. So as long
constitutionally, so what?
Well, and about constitutionally, so what? It means that if the Conservatives hang on for 2 years, heaven forfend that they carry on for 2 years with Liz Truss because she said she's going to lead them into the next general election, then that is going to upset a lot of people, the vast majority of people,
which means happy days.
Yeah, but I'm looking at this from the point of view of what the Conservatives making the wrong decisions now, making things far worse for themselves than if they acted quickly, both to replace Liz Truss. And although it's going to be very, very painful for them to call a general election, because that's what the public want.
Why do you think that the opinion polls are not showing any sign of revival for the Liberal Democrats? The percentage that you're polling is sort of 9, 10, 11%, and that's been fairly consistent. And yes, you've won by-elections. You did well in the local elections. But all the Conservative voters seem to be sort of jumping over you and going to Labour. Why is that?
Because at the moment, what people are thinking about is what is the next government going to be? Is it going to be Labour or is it going to be Conservative? When it actually comes to a general election, there'll be loads of seats all over the country where Conservative voters won't be able to bring themselves to vote Labour, but they will vote Liberal Democrat in order to defeat the Tories. And that's when we will see a significant increase in support for the Liberal Democrats.
David?
Can I challenge in this issue, though, about
Don't ask me, I'm not
constitutionally... the general premise, though, that the idea that constitutionally having an election is not the right thing to do. I mean, given that the Prime Minister has radically departed from what the Conservative Party promised in the 2019 manifesto, surely there's a political and moral case, actually, to have a general election because she has departed so far
that
from
may
Boris
be,
Johnson's
but
agenda. Constitutionally,
there is no obligation to have... I mean, when Gordon Brown took over from Tony Blair, there was no leadership election because no one dared stand against the great clanking fist. Understandably so in many ways. But I don't remember all of this debate happening then.
No.
We weren't in a state of extreme crisis to the level that we're at today. And I think what MPs need to remember is that they're put there by their voters, by their constituents. And if the vast majority of voters want a general election, I think it's incumbent on all politicians to heed that call. I think it's a morally right thing to do. And we've quite clearly got a government who's in power who is not capable of governing the country at a time of crisis. And that's a very serious situation to be in.
Iain, I don't know any voter who has gone into a polling booth and considered what the constitutional issues are. They've considered
we have a constitution for a reason. And okay, it's not written down. It's entirely based on precedent. But, I mean, you can't just junk 300 years or however many 100 years just because, and I get it from my callers all the time, we want a general election. I don't deny that there is a clamour out there for a general election. But... and
it's possible for the Prime Minister to call a general election.
Of course it is.
And that would be constitutional. Or there could be a vote of no confidence in the government.
Liz Truss, you would not be calling a general election.
Of course not. Can I help Brian on why people are not choosing to opt for Lib Dems? Because, you know, essentially you don't really stand for anything bluntly, and also there's a lot of contradictions between what you might say.
That's a bit of an insult, isn't it?
Well, it's the truth. I mean, you know, what would you do with the economy? Nobody knows. And then if you compare what you often say in central government with what you do locally, you always have contradictions around things like planning, etc. And on the point of the manifesto, I think you're absolutely right. There shouldn't have been a strong deviation from the 2019 manifesto. I believe the Prime Minister said that now she's going to stick with delivering the things that we promised in 2019, which should have been what happened from the start, but as the thing that she said she's doing now. And I think because of that, there's probably less of a need for a general election.
Just because the Prime Minister has said sorry, though, doesn't make it okay. You know, if somebody went out and drove my car into the central reservation of the motorway, just because they said sorry doesn't mean I would let them to continue on with the journey.
Yeah, but perhaps I'm more forgiving than you. I think sorry is a powerful
And Samuel, I think you've got a point in that if you don't understand what the Liberal Democrats stand for, then that is a problem for the Liberal Democrats. It's not. So, for example, the first party to call for a windfall tax on the energy suppliers was the Liberal Democrats, and Labour Party adopted it, but because the Labour Party is much bigger than the Liberal Democrats, they're the ones that everybody talks about, they're the ones who thought it up in the first place. When you actually look at, and people do at general elections look at what parties stand for, they will find that the Liberal Democrats definitely stand up for the sort of things that they
And would there be a consistency locally? I doubt it very much on most of the things that you...
But on that point about the energy thing, you're absolutely right. Ed Davies stood up and announced this. And I think it was the week Keir Starmer was on holiday, and it sent Labour HQ into total panic. They won't admit this. I actually put this to Keir Starmer himself when I was in Edinburgh. And they effectively adopted an identical policy and sold it as theirs. But in a sense, you can't blame them, because the fact that when your party announced it didn't get the coverage, well, that's a failure of communications on your party.
Which is what I just said. And, you know, borrow with pride. I mean, at the end of the day, if we get Liberal Democrat policies implemented in government, then that's what we stand for, because we're a party of principle. I think because of what happened has happened with this Conservative government, in vast swathes of the country where there is a Conservative MP and the Liberal Democrats are the closest challenger, or where the Liberal Democrats are most likely to defeat that Conservative candidate, then people will vote Liberal Democrat.
Right. Well, that was a good start to the programme. I think very spirited debate there. And you've heard Liberal Democrats' principal party. Remember that, Samuel. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
I'm
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It is 21 minutes past 8 on LBC. Rebecca Long-Bailey, Samuel Kasumu, Lord Brian Paddick and David Linden with us talking about the great issues of the day, or the ones that you want to ask them about. Anyway, so let's go to Dan, who's in Southampton. Hello, Dan.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, not too bad. What would you like to say?
Yeah, so I'm pivoting slightly from just listening to the previous debate. Is the issue here now around the Conservative Party is potentially going to lose for a generation, possibly longer, because they've always campaigned on safe and stable economic policy, but now we can see Brexit really for what it is in terms of leaving the European Union. Hands up, I'm a keen Remainer, but then also a series of catastrophes around, I say catastrophes might be a bit of a strong word, but a series of errors in financial management that then results in a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who appears to be, one, financially illiterate, but two, are so arrogant that they don't test or talk to the various third parties that will corroborate their thinking. And I suppose that the next bit is, the last part of my point is, there's a tragedy in this, in that actually I'm quite bullish on the British economy, in that next year we're seeing freight costs coming down, we will see market rates for energy coming down and food prices coming down. And actually this is an act of financial and economic vandalism because these people just simply haven't thought this through. Last point, guys, in terms of, and girls, in terms of politicians, I think you're massively underpaid for the job that you do. I know there'll be lots of listeners who disagree. The amount of pressure that you soak up and the big decisions that you make, we should be getting the very best people we can, and we should be paying them extremely well. That's all I had. Thank you.
Well, we have the very best people on this panel, even though we're not paying them. Well, there's a lot to unpick there, isn't there? And I think one of the interesting things that you said was about prices coming down in all sorts of different sectors, which I'm thinking, well, if I was a Tory minister, that's a message that I would be promulgating, but I haven't heard a single one doing it. Brian Paddick.
Well, I mean, are the Tories going to lose for a generation? I mean, I think you said earlier in your programme, Iain, about why would anybody trust what's written in the Tory party manifesto? Because when they are in government, none of the promises seem to be delivered. Yes, there are global pressures, but these errors in financial management, the uncosted tax cuts, are what has pushed up government borrowing, which is what is putting pressure on mortgages and so forth. So it's large, the Conservative Party reputation for being safe and stable and being financially prudent is shot out of the water. It appears that the only reason why they've been brought back to earth from the fantasy that they were doing, what Rishi Sunak called fantasy economics, turned out to be exactly that, were the markets. If it weren't for the markets, then they would have completely ruined the thing. At the end of the day, as far as Brexit is concerned, I think public opinion, again, is that there is now a majority who think it was a mistake to leave the European Union, and we are suffering the consequences of that. Now, there's a difficult balancing act here. It was a democratic decision of a referendum for us to leave the European Union, but for how much longer will the British public put up with this sort of self-harm?
But it's interesting that the Labour Party have now seemingly reconciled themselves to Brexit, and Keir Starmer has said in terms, we will not go back into the single market. I'm slightly unclear of the Lib Dem position on that.
Well, we say that our long-term goal is to become members of the single market, at least, and if in the longer term to rejoin the European Union. But it has to be in line with public opinion. It's not something, we don't, although I said we're a principal party, that doesn't mean we completely ignore what the public say.
You did up to 2019 though, didn't you?
But there is... I wasn't anything anyway. But in terms of public opinion, we are with public opinion. Public opinion are regretting the impacts on them of Brexit. I understand why Labour are in difficulty, because red wall seats people in red wall seats, there is an attraction of being a completely independent country and not subject to European Union laws and so forth. What people are beginning to realise is the damage it does, the economic damage it does to them, being outside.
But just looking at it from a core political point of view, and I don't really want to get sort of bogged down on Brexit on this, but politically, it would be more advantageous to you for your party to be a bit more Brexity, because the seats that you're trying to win are mainly Conservative seats in the south of England now. But for someone like me, for example, who's totally disillusioned with the Conservatives, having voted Conservative in every general election bar one in the past, I mean, I would find it quite difficult to vote Liberal Democrat because of your policies on Europe, and I suspect I'm not alone in that.
Well, as I say, it's not about the principle of being an independent country or being in the European Union. It is about what is going to make the country wealthier, what is going to help people heat their homes and put food on the table. And if becoming a member of the single market, for example, with the rules that come with that, is going to increase people's prosperity and allow people to live their lives in a better way, then why would you not do that? Because it's not all about economic prosperity. It's about much deeper principles than that. And I think that's where the Liberal Democrats have really underestimated people who voted for Brexit. But as I say, this is not a Brexit programme, so let's move on. Rebecca, do you want to answer Dan's various questions or points?
Well, Dan, I think you summed it up when you said that there was economic vandalism. And I think what we've seen certainly over the last few weeks is a bit like a sixth form debate where the two people debating are trying to emulate the political heroes. Liz Truss is trying to be Margaret Thatcher without the flair, advocating the most malign aspects of 1980s trickle-down economics, which we know doesn't work. And then you've got Jeremy Hunt now, who's come onto the stage, who's quite clearly trying to emulate George Osborne, advocating austerity, but trying to dress it up as compassionate conservatism. Again, we know that austerity didn't lead to growth. It actually produced some of the worst productivity growth since the 18th century, and it destroyed lives. And the frightening thing is that certainly not on the Conservative benches, we haven't heard any utterances at all about what real robust long-term economic plan is going to get us out of this mess. Now, what we should be hearing is a plan that deals with some of the urgent things that we need to do to boost growth, and that's to boost incomes, wages, pensions and benefits. We need to hear talk of investment in the tools that increase productivity and living standards, like investing in public services, skills, infrastructure, research and development and industry through a Green New Deal. And we need to hear about fair taxation. We've seen a U-turn on the malign tax cuts that Liz Truss tried to roll forward, but we need to see fair tax now. We need to see higher windfall taxes on oil and gas profits. We need to tax income from wealth at the same rate as income from work. And overall, we need to have a discussion about taxing wealth, because we don't have a fair taxation system. And then finally, I think we really need to start having public discussions about bringing the cost of basics down. And that means bringing things such as energy, water, rail and mail into public ownership.
Samuel.
I mean, if I were the markets and I heard that, I'd probably be very worried about Labour becoming the next administration.
I don't think so. I mean, they're already frightened enough by Liz Truss.
I mean, what you were saying sounded a lot more scary. But the premise of the point...
boosting growth and productivity
spend, which is part of the challenges that we've had over the last 2 weeks.
To improve productivity.
I think that makes a very important point, which is historically the Conservative Party has been known for sound financial management, being strong, stable, etc. Clearly, our reputation has taken a massive hit over the last...
Not just a hit, it's been destroyed.
Massive hit over the last few weeks. And to rebuild that reputation is going to take a lot of work and a lot of reaching out and building of trust. What I would say is, I don't think in principle there's anything wrong with challenging commonly held orthodoxy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the argument that we've had stagnated growth for many years and therefore there is a need for some changes was a compelling argument. Clearly the execution was shocking and there was a lot of hubris around, entering the Treasury and sacking the permanent secretary, etc. We don't need to, list all of the stupid things that happened. My message to Conservative colleagues, as I keep saying, is we don't win trust through division. I think the one thing we have to do is come together, be more coherent, and articulate a plan that shows we're going to be willing to do what it takes to rebuild.
What lessons have you learned from this experience of Liz Truss in her first 6 weeks? I mean, if you were to be elected Mayor of London in, is it 2024, what lessons have you learned that would govern your first 6 weeks?
I probably wouldn't go around sacking people, firstly. Secondly, I think, and it's not just Liz, but I would say over the last few years, we've had this challenge where maybe some of my colleagues have been very, very quick to start fights with people, whether that be people who voted to remain in the European Union, or people that might have different cultural views to some of us, and then now it was people who might have some traditional views on the economy. I just don't think that is the right way to govern.
David?
Well, I mean, I think Dan's question was, are the Tories going to lose power for a generation? I would point out that people in Scotland haven't voted majority Conservative since the 1950s. That's one of the reasons why I'd quite like Scotland to become an independent country, so we actually get the government that we vote for. I mean, we talk about, economic vandalism. I absolutely agree, and, there's a perception in Westminster that this week Jeremy Hunt has been going around putting some of the boarding up. But there are still aspects of the policies from the government that remain on the table that are deeply challenging. I still don't understand why, at a time when the Chancellor is saying to people that we are having to take difficult fiscal decisions, we still have no cap on bankers' bonuses. The government has said that they are uncapping bankers' bonuses. Now, I don't think people have learned anything from 2008, 2009, when you incentivise bankers, encourage them to take risk, which was the whole reason we get into that mess in the first place. I
think their argument is that a lot of the regulation has changed since then, and so the cap is unnecessary.
What they would say is that one of the reasons why they wanted to lift that cap is to try and attract more people here. I would ask people, well, why is it that people left? Is it something to do with what happened on the 31st of January 2020? People relocating to Paris and to Dublin. Unlike Liberal Democrats,
very few have.
My party actually does support rejoining the European Union. People in Scotland voted 62% to remain. So I think that what you're seeing with a lot of the reforms that Liz Truss tried to make in her economic package are actually to try and make up for the damage that's been caused by Brexit, which I think some people might be condemning.
And to be fair, that policy area is gone to consultation. It's not definitely going to...
Bankers' bonuses?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, if you went out to the street right now into Southampton and asked people, do you think bankers should have uncapped bonuses whilst pensioners are going to lose the triple lock?
I totally agree.
I don't think you need a focus group for that.
I think yesterday, the new Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, he was asked why he hadn't reversed the announcement on bankers' bonuses, and his answer was that we'll be able to get more in tax. So I don't think there's going to be a rolling back on that, and it's questionable to make that assertion in the first place, because what happened when the bankers' cap came in was that a lot of banks replaced that kind of flexible kind of pay structure with a big bonus at the end with fixed salaries. So they were paying tax on their salaries. Now the argument goes that, oh, well, the bankers' cap didn't work because, there's so much regulation in place. We won't see another financial crash anymore. There isn't risk taking. And that's just not true. There is regulation in place, but not enough to deter a risk on the scale that we saw in 2007, 2008. The same derivatives still exist within the markets, albeit packaged in a different name. And I think bringing the bankers, lifting the bankers' cap, should I say, will encourage more risk taking. And that frightens me.
OK, thank you all very much. 0345 6060 973. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC from Daryl Jackson. It's 8:34.
Officials say the NHS is setting up war rooms as it prepares for one of the toughest winters in its history. Health leaders in England wrote to staff to set out winter resilience plans. A poll suggests a majority of Conservative members want Liz Truss to resign just 6 weeks after they voted her in. The YouGov survey also revealed they'd like Boris Johnson to replace her as Prime Minister. And the RMT union has announced another 3 days of strike action for next month. On the 3rd, 5th and 7th of November, rail staff will walk out in an ongoing dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. LBC Weather, it will be breezy this evening with showers moving to the southwest and Northern Ireland, heavy and thundery in places, drier elsewhere with a low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Use a
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:38, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Samuel Kasumu, Lord Brian Paddick and David Linden are with me answering your calls. Let's go to actually a text question now from Simon in Nairn, who says, does the panel agree with me that with the UK government falling into disrepair, there's never been a better time for the Scottish people to cut and run? Surprise us, David Linden.
I happen to agree with Simon.
Really?
I tend to be of the view that I've been campaigning for the SNP since I was 11 years old. I'm 32 now. I think that, yes, the chaos that's ongoing at the moment is deeply regrettable. And yes, it probably helps the arguments for independence. But in reality, my kind of fundamental belief in Scottish independence is that Scotland should get the government that it votes for. And do you know what? If people in Scotland are daft enough to vote for a right-of-centre, Thatcherite economic model government in Scotland, then that's fine. But the reality is we've not done that since the 1950s. So, yes, I happen to think that actually Scottish independence is a good thing. But what I do worry about, and I have friends and family in other parts of the UK, what the Conservative Party have done to the UK economy is utterly unforgivable. Yes, mortgage rates are rising in Shettleston and Baillieston in my constituency. Equally, that's happening in Salford and in various parts of London as well. So I think that the Conservatives have been proven to be utterly unfit for office, but it's because they're unfit for office I never again want to have them foisted upon my country.
Right, brief answers from the rest of you, because we've got lots of great questions to get through. Samuel?
Clearly I believe we're stronger together as a union. I think we have to make a better case to the people of Scotland than we have done in recent times. I'm going to leave it at that because you said keep it short.
We could have had a bit more length there. Rebecca?
Well, I think we're stronger united. I wouldn't ever want to stand in the way of the democratic right of the people of Scotland, of course, but if it ever came to a referendum, I'd be campaigning for Scotland to remain part of
Do you think there should be a referendum?
I think that's up to the people of Scotland to decide.
Haven't they decided by giving David's party a mandate in the last Scottish elections?
So we've got quite a lot of mandates.
Together with the Greens, they have a majority in the Scottish Parliament.
Well, I think if it seemed that the majority of people in Scotland wanted to have another independence referendum, then I think it would be important for politicians to listen to that call in the same way that we need to have a general election here, in Westminster. But as I say, I think economically and socially we're stronger together, but I can completely understand why a lot of people in Scotland would look at what's happening in Westminster and despair, in the same way that in Salford there's probably a lot of people who'd like to have an independence referendum in Salford and set up our own republic, but we know really that economically and socially we're all stronger together.
President Long-Bailey, it has a certain ring to it. Brian?
Well, the same as the others. I think that the United Kingdom is much stronger together. It's not, the arguments and the political arguments in Scotland shouldn't simply just be about independence. The Scottish National Party are saying that if they don't get the referendum, the next general election will be a de facto. The only issue that they'll be campaigning on is independence. Well, that's all very well, but health, education, public services, they are really important things to the people of Scotland, and they should be able to vote on those issues, not just on independence.
I mean, you're a Liberal Democrat. As a Democrat, what is the means for Scotland to leave this union?
Well, as I say, I can understand at the moment the feeling in Scotland with a Tory government where you say that very few people in Scotland vote for the Tories, and you've got a Tory government making such a hash of the whole thing. Why there might be at the moment even more people thinking that Scotland would be better off independent, but I'm not sure that is the case. And with the resurgence of the Liberal Democrats and Labour against the failures of the Tories, I think the argument for an independent Scotland will diminish further.
But can I press you further? How, if this is a voluntary union and people in Scotland have expressed, for example, more than 70 of the 129 MSPs have been elected in a pro-independence ticket, if people in Scotland have indicated their desire to leave this union, how do we do that democratically?
Can I just challenge that? Most of the polling would say that the majority of Scotland are in favour of remaining in the United Kingdom, firstly. Secondly, you had your referendum. So it should be referendum should be a once in a generation activity. So we're not saying there'll never ever be another referendum, but now is clearly not the time.
I find it a little bit difficult to listen to somebody who was an advisor to Boris Johnson, who in Parliament asked the Parliament several times to have a general election. But in Parliament, in the last Parliament, Boris Johnson asked Parliament to have a general election. Parliament said no. He brought it back again, and he brought it back again. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander.
Slam dunk.
But there's totally different things. A referendum and a general election.
When people change their minds, they should have the opportunity.
Okay.
But they haven't changed their mind. You haven't changed your mind. The polling suggests that the people of Scotland have not changed their mind. So a referendum now would just simply be a
to be fair, the polling for a long time suggested that they had changed their mind and there was a majority for independence. I think the polls have gone the other way a bit now. But there was... about 2 years where
thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money on private polling that it won't release. So if they don't think people are changing their minds, why?
No, but there's public polling. Can I just say one quick thing on this subject? We should look at why people in Scotland are voting for the SNP in their droves, because I don't think it's simply because they are looking for a referendum. No, I think that perhaps there are broader reasons, and I think that's what we should be focusing on. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I agree with Brian.
Having been very brief, you then sort of went back on that, didn't you, Samuel? Right, we're going to come to more of your questions in a moment. It's 8:45.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
James Heapy is Armed Forces and Veterans Minister. You are a military bloke. When the flag starts flying, where should the leader be?
The leader needs to be where the leader needs to be. I mean, there is...
What the hell does that mean? When you were leading, I would imagine you led from the front, didn't you, Minister?
Well, it depends where you need to be.
Archie Norma, chairman of Marks and Spencer's, indeed a former Conservative MP himself. Should Liz Truss go?
When people make that sort of start, it's very, very hard to recover. There's a long queue of people wanting to castigate politicians. I don't want to join that queue. I just think if we're going to make a change, it would be better if it happened soon.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
With Motorway, where dealers compete to give you their best price for your car.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:48 on LBC. We have with us Rebecca Long-Bailey, Samuel Kasumu, Brian Paddick and David Linden. We have 12 minutes of the programme left and I want to get through 4 questions, which is probably going to be a bit ambitious. Anyway, let's go to Keith in Shoreditch first of all. Hello, Keith.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for letting me ask the question. Present company an exception, of course.
Here we go.
Why is our political class so useless, both left and right? Why haven't we got any high-quality politicians anymore, like your Margaret Thatchers, your Michael Heseltines, your Barbara Castles, your Tony Benn? What and why?
Oh, you've got to add a Liberal to that as well.
Okay, all right.
Right, so
Brian Paddick.
Why have we got such a scarcity of high-quality politicians? Whoever I start with here, David.
No, I think there's a fair point to that, and I guess the question goes back to Keith. I mean, if Keith thinks that the quality of politicians is so low, then hopefully he'll join a political party and stand for election. To keep this brief, if you read the book by Isabel Hardman, Why We Get the Wrong Politicians, I think that makes the point, is that there's a diminishing membership of political parties and people being involved in the political process. We need more people to get involved, and that includes Keith and Shoreditch.
Brian.
I had a discussion with the leader of my group in the Liberal Democrats just before I came here about whether the cost-benefit...
How useless your peers were.
About the cost-benefit analysis of continuing to be, in my case, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Home Affairs, when you balance what you get from that against the aggravation that you get. I mean, even worse for women politicians and black politicians, then why would anybody put themselves in that position? And the answer is public service. But, you know, you can't...
I mean, that is an interesting point, because I've always said if my best friend came to me and said, Ian, I'm thinking of standing for Parliament, I would probably try to dissuade them. And I mean, that's a very sad state of affairs, isn't it? But I mean, Brian's obviously concerned by sort of the reaction, I guess you're talking about social media predominantly here. I mean, you held a very prominent shadow cabinet position. Did that get you down sometimes?
It does. It gets you down quite a lot, because I think certainly when you enter politics, you do so, well, most politicians do anyway, because they want to create a better world for their children and grandchildren, and you have a set of values and ideas that you want to implement, and sometimes that's very difficult, and you come across people with different views, and that's fine if people can be respectful and accept your views are different from theirs. But every now and again you'll come across the machine politician, the person who's been through the machine, decided probably at the age 16 they wanted to be a politician and met the right people and moved in the right circles. And that's one of the things that upsets me really when I see that in politics, because what we need to have, going back to Keith's question, is that it's not a question of kind of why is the political class so useless, is why isn't the political class a direct representation of society as a whole? We should have farmers who are politicians, we should have firemen who are politicians, we should have lawyers who are politicians, so that we can represent a whole cross-section of society.
Deselected a fireman who's a politician, Sam Tarry.
Was he a fireman?
Wasn't he?
I didn't know
Yeah,
he was a fireman.
he was in the Fire Brigades Union, so I assumed at some point
He might have
he
been
must
in
have
the
been a fireman.
FBU unit, but I didn't know he was
I was a
fireman.
policeman.
Oh, well, that's all right. We'll let you off then. Well, no, it's about having that diversity from all walks of life, and I don't think we've got there yet in British politics. And I think everything else comes with experience, and certainly political parties do need to do a lot more, and this is all parties, by the way, to support their politicians in helping them to become more articulate, because you don't arrive as a politician with the ability to be able to deliver amazing speeches in Parliament. That comes with time, and some of us haven't got there yet. Others are veterans at it. So we do need a little bit of support.
Well, you're talking about Liz Truss rather than yourself there. Samuel.
Very quickly, I think I'd put it down to 3 C's. One, cost. It's very expensive. Putting yourself forward to try for any office. Connections. You know, if you're from an underrepresented background, you don't have the connections with people to get you the internship or the job at number 10, etc. It's very difficult. And my background is was totally different to most of my colleagues when I was a special advisor at number 10, probably all of them, to be honest. And then the last C is conviction. Sometimes when you have really strong beliefs, the party system is not conducive for you to be able to express yourself or stay true to yourself or be honest and open in safe spaces. So.
Keith, thank you very much. What a great question. Let's go to another one from Julie in Hackney. This is a text question. Is the Labour Party quietly purging the left in time for the next election, Rebecca Long-Bailey?
Oh, well, I hope not, Ian.
You were purged, weren't you?
No.
Yeah, Keir Starmer didn't keep you in his shadow cabinet.
No, I know. But no, I hope not. I mean, there's certainly a lot of media reporting on this issue, and it would worry me if that was the case. So I hope that it isn't, because we need to have, in the same way that we've got to have Parliament as diverse as possible, the Labour Party has to represent a broad church, and that means having differences of opinion. So, for example, on public ownership, I'm quite clear that I want to see public ownership of rail, mail, energy and water. There are other people in the Labour Party who completely disagree with my take on things, but it's healthy for us as a party to have those discussions, and then eventually we reach the best policy conclusions at the end of it. And to stifle that debate and take people away from that because they believe in certain things,
you don't believe that's
very
happening?
Dangerous.
Oh, she knows it is.
Well, as I say, there's been a lot of media reporting. I wouldn't like to comment on specific cases, but I hope very strongly that it isn't happening.
Okay, Samuel?
Yeah, I mean, you hope that it isn't, but you know that it is, because in Campbell and Peckham, you've had a candidate who is on the left who's clearly not been allowed to put himself forward, even though he's a councillor, I think, in Wandsworth. And
Emmerdent Code in Kensington.
Yeah, so you know it's happening. But again, it goes back to this broader point. You know, can you have a party system where people are able to, have their convictions and still be able to function, especially when, like Keir Starmer, you think you're very close to potentially being the next Prime Minister?
Brian?
My criticism of Keir Starmer is that he's been trying too hard to convince people he's not Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, he's been quite successful in that, hasn't he?
Yeah, but I think he's betrayed his principles in order to prove that point, in order to get elected. Because at the end of the day, if you don't get elected, you can't implement any of your policies.
Well,
I understand.
He's doing what Tony Blair kind of did.
Yeah, but I think he's gone too far.
Okay, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are trying to kind of purge the left of the party. I mean, the thing that I get frustrated about with the Labour Party is that, we've got the Conservatives in power, but, even with the Conservatives in power, we need a strong opposition. And it's frankly not good enough to have Keir Starmer just sitting there being that kind of pale, stale male lawyer from North London trying to be, well, I'm not as bad as these guys. I mean, I don't really know what the Labour Party stand for other than that extra windfall tax for 6 months. And I think if you went out on the street at the moment, most people wouldn't see be able to get a fag paper between Keir Starmer and the Tory government.
Okay, right, let's move on to a text question from Anne in Peckham, who says, is it any surprise that Louise Casey's report found that racist and misogynistic cops in the Met Police were allowed to stay in their jobs? Haven't we known for ages that police culture needs to change? Well, you're the expert on this, Brian Paddick.
No, it's not a surprise. I think, in essence, the Louise Casey report says the culture in the Metropolitan Police is such that it's too easy to be a wrongdoer, and it's too difficult to stand up and report people who are doing wrong. The culture is that people who are whistleblowers, me included, end up getting shafted.
Do you think that things will change? I mean, Mark Rowley promises that things will change, but we've heard from a succession of Metropolitan Police Commissioners that things will change, and they never seem to.
Well, I think Mark Rowley and Lynn Owens, his deputy, are a formidable team, and it is possible for them to make progress. I'm a bit concerned that in his immediate actions, he hasn't listed protection of whistleblowers as one of the things that he's going to do. But he's making all the right noises. But you will know the most difficult thing to change in any organisation is the culture. And it is going to take monumental effort, and it's going to take time.
Samuel, obviously this is going to form a major part of the mayoral campaign when it kicks off. What ideas do you have about reforming the Metropolitan Police?
I mean, just to say, I completely agree with Brian. I think there's been many reviews, and we seem to keep coming back to the same point. I think the main thing we need is strong structures for accountability, and that is not just inside the Metropolitan Police, but also external to that. Communities need to know that the police are on their side, and they can trust that they are headed in the right direction. I was involved in the setting up of the Independent Scrutiny Oversight Board for the National Police Chiefs Council just last year. So I think that there are people who want to make sure that things are different, but we have to be able to see more transparency, more trust, more people that we know have the right intentions being able to come back. People like Brian, who has a wealth of experience, being able to feed back into what went wrong last time. You're offering the job. Totally, if he wants one.
Well, there we go.
You heard it here first.
Yes, exactly. We'll keep you to that. Rebecca, Greater Manchester Police have had their problems over the last few years. Do you recognise I don't know how much you followed this, but what Louise Casey has found, do you think it's the same in other forces around the country?
I think it will be, unfortunately, and I think you have to recognise that a culture has permeated from the top at Westminster, and only tonight, for example, the government passed a piece of legislation called the Public Order Bill, which is a sweeping assault on our rights as citizens. It will criminalise people for protesting in quite simple ways, but some of the most insidious parts of the Public Order Bill are the extension of stop and search powers and serious violent reduction orders, which will disproportionately be used against black and ethnic minority communities, as they have been in their current form within London and some of the other city regions across the UK, and that needs to be shelved, that piece of legislation, in my view, if we're going to...
And I agree with Rebecca.
David, very briefly, if we can.
Yeah, I don't really have a dog in this fight as a Scottish MP. I would say is that my perceptions, kind of looking in on it from the outside, is that the political oversight seems to fall somewhat between the stools between the Home Secretary and the Mayor, and I think there's been a real application of responsibility on the part of politicians. Yeah. Now, whether we want politicians to be out there leading our police forces is a separate matter, but there's definitely been an application of responsibility from SW.
Right, our final fun question from Janie in Weymouth. All these billionaires have been buying social media companies lately, like Elon Musk with Twitter and Ye. Who's Ye? Kanye West with Parler. Is it Parler? I don't know. They keep talking of making a free speech platform and unbanning people. But what I would like to know is the opposite. If they owned, i.e. if you owned a social media company, who would panel members ban and why?
Oh my goodness.
You can vent your collective spleens right now. David?
I've got to be honest, I'm on social media, but I use it for broadcast only now. I've got to the stage where my mental resilience just cannot take looking at the notifications and all the abuse, so I have very little interest.
So you'd like to ban the cybernats?
Yes, absolutely. I think they're an absolute disgrace.
Well, that was a surprise. Brian?
I think everybody should get a chance on my new media platform until they start abusing other people on the site.
Trouble is, where do you? We would all draw a different line as to where abuse starts and how serious it is. It's quite difficult to be.
But it's like your Twitter feed and my Twitter feed. People want to be abusive, go to someone else's Twitter feed.
I send them to yours.
If people want to go to, if people want to abuse each other, they can use a different platform to the one that I own.
What about Donald Trump? Was it right to ban him?
Well, there is a real danger of making Donald Trump a martyr and making things even worse and making him even more popular.
Rebecca?
Well, I'm rubbish at social media, so I'd have a really rubbish social media platform. I don't even understand what Instagram is or TikTok. My office makes me do Instagram every now and again to try and kind of raise my profile, but I'm rubbish, and it takes me about an hour to write a tweet because I can't write in 20 characters what I need to say as I'm answering this question in more than 20 characters.
So basically what you're saying is you'd ban yourself.
I'd probably ban myself in social media. That would be wise.
Samuel?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not great at social media. I'm having to improve for obvious reasons. I'd probably ban politicians. I feel like a lot of politicians spend too much time worrying about whether or not they're going to trend. What they need to be doing is focusing on doing...
So you'd ban yourself as well? You've effectively
No,
banned
what I was going to say is, when I started as an MP, one of the bits of advice that I was given for running social media was if you were a pub landlord and somebody was behaving inappropriately in your pub, you would chuck them out. I'm not convinced politicians actually apply that in practice with their social media feeds, and I think that the mental health and well-being across the road would be a hell of a lot better if they
Well, it's been a great hour. Thank you very much all for taking part. Rebecca Long-Bailey, Samuel Kasumu, Brian Paddick and David Linden. You can find them all on social media and tell them how lovely they are and what a brilliant performance they put in on Cross Question. We have another Cross Question for you tomorrow at the same time, 8 o'clock. And in a moment, we're going to be talking about the pensioners' triple lock. Is Liz Truss going to renege on that manifesto commitment too? And if so, do you think she should? Is there an argument for doing so? Or do you think it's going to hit the most vulnerable in society? But of course, pensioners as a group are not the most vulnerable in society. If you look at the income range, should that money be spent on other groups instead? On that bombshell, it's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation, this is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Liz Truss has spent the day trying to convince her own MPs to back her, despite a poll suggesting the majority of Conservative Party members want her to go. The Prime Minister led Cabinet this morning before meeting an influential group of Eurosceptic backbenchers. It's chaired by Mark Francois.
It was a positive meeting. She was open. She engaged with my colleagues. She answered questions directly. We all know that she's had a very difficult time of it, and colleagues wanted her to succeed.
Well, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Labour MP and former Shadow Cabinet Minister, told LBC